Former Ohio Governor John Kasich has been asked to speak at the Democratic convention. According to The Hill, they said it's unclear if Kasich will explicitly endorse the presumptive Democratic nominee when he speaks at the convention, but the expected remarks would amount to a major show of support for Biden by a lifelong Republican who rose to political prominence amid the Tea Party movement a decade ago. Because nothing says Democratic Party by being endorsed by Republicans. Literally. The plans, of course, were first reported on Monday by the Associated Press. Kasich, who unsuccessfully ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, has been fiercely critical of President Trump, going so far as to call for his impeachment last year. So understand, the Democratic Party, in doing this, is rehabilitating the worst Republicans, but they're doing so just because they're anti-Trump. And I know some of you might be like, wait a minute, the worst? What are you calling John Kasich the worst? No, that's too much. I remember John Kasich back from 2016. He's a reasonable Republican. What are you talking about? He's a reasonable, moderate Republican, and he doesn't like Trump. What are you complaining about, lefties? God. I mean, after all, Bernie wasn't a Democrat, and you guys liked him. What is wrong with you? What's wrong with Kasich? Well, let me tell you what's wrong with John Kasich. His policy positions. I know for all the nice talking and moderate sounding language, John Kasich is still an abhorrent Republican because he supports abhorrent policies. For example, right, cutting Planned Parenthood funding in Ohio. He also, and that's part of his spending cuts, by the way, which led to, of course, things getting defunded. Again, Planned Parenthood, but you also have school systems being defunded, roads, bridges, things like that, infrastructure spending that they were unable to do. Things are falling apart. You also have tax cuts for businesses, corporations. But there was also his record on unions, or I should say his fight against labor. Senate Bill 5. Senate Bill 5 went after collective bargaining rights in the same way that Governor Scott Walker's bill also went after labor rights. Now, Kasich got this passed and signed into law, but it had proven to be so unpopular that, such an assault against workers and workers' rights that it was voted down in a ballot referendum that same year. So they didn't lay down and accept it like they did in Wisconsin. Now, John Kasich also went after LGBT rights and abortion rights very heavily. Kasich, for example, had opposed same-sex marriage and authorized the fight to protect Ohio's same-sex marriage ban. Oh, I thought being a Democrat, I thought being liberal or being moderate would be to accept same-sex marriage. Well, not anymore, apparently. And so, what about reproductive rights? Apparently not for the Democrats. Kasich also signed restrictive abortion bills that led to the closure of half of Ohio's abortion clinics. He also privatized prisons, set up a taxpayer-funded corporate slush fund that he claimed would spark job creation, but actually had little to no oversight. That's who John Kasich is. John Kasich, look, just because the man's not a gibbering lunatic like Donald Trump does not mean that he's a good person, does not mean that he's a member of the resistance. But here's the problem with the Democratic Party. They keep inviting people like this to be part of the resistance against Donald Trump. Again, they hold a lot of the same policy positions as Donald Trump, these Republicans. But for some reason, since they're anti-Trump, the Democrats are like, ooh, come on over. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the resistance. I mean, you've got Rick Wilson, one of the biggest war hawks, led us into Iraq, which was an absolute debacle and a disaster. Same thing with George W. Bush and Bill Kristol and George Conway. Oh, by the way, these are all members of the Lincoln Project, except for George W. Bush, right? Who was still painting somewhere. These guys, again, engineered one of the biggest military debacles in history, in American history. I mean, aside from, I guess, Vietnam, right? But they would have been on the side of it. I mean, these guys, they're not good people. They're not good people. They're disasters. They're terrible people. The deaths of thousands of civilians is on their hands. Massively right wing. And yet, the Democratic Party would rather rehabilitate these guys in their public image, right? They'd rather do that than reach out to the left with more than just empty promises and token reforms. The Democratic Party is basically right wing now. And it's being taken over, not by the left, but by conservatives. These are the voters that the establishment wants. They want, and again, this is what they tried to go for in 2016 and failed. Not because they were, too like left wing or not right wing enough. No, it's because if you, put up a Republican versus Republican light, they're going to choose the Republican. The Democratic Party still does not understand that very simple lesson. And it's because they don't want to actually understand that lesson. These are the people, again, these right-wingers, these suburban Republican voters, they don't like how uncivil Donald Trump is. And they don't want socialism in America, even though we actually do have socialism. And by the way, at the end of the day, they're still probably going to vote Republican. Remember, Donald Trump has an 86% approval rating by the Republican Party. It actually used to be in the 90s before the coronavirus pandemic. And he saw, seen some of that base disappear, turn on him. But 86% of the party there is still on his side. That is massive. Massive. You think those people are going to vote for Joe Biden? As conservative as Joe Biden is? Again, if you get a Republican light versus a Republican, they're going to vote for the Republican. Now, the good news is that it might not be in enough numbers to have Donald Trump win re-election. But that said, we're still stuck with right wing. And again, that's a disaster because look, left-leaning policies championed by people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ro Khanna, Pramila Jayapal, others, right? They're not only dismissed, but mocked by the establishment, despite holding massive appeal with Democratic voters. I think the lesson here is let's not go to the right. And this to me feels like another bend to the right to rehabilitate another terrible Republican politician simply for the fact that he's anti-Trump and to eventually legitimize a further rightward shift once Biden gets into power. And that's scary. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.